home is famous for having the most exorcisms in the UK. It is bound to have a rich history. There's a house in Wales called Heol, Fanog, and it sets in the Brecon Beacons. I had an entire 6-minute video and it just deleted it, so let's try this again. Quick refresher, this is Liz and Bill Rich. They bought the house and they moved in. They thought everything was going to go great. She was expecting this little one at the time, and then all hell broke loose. First day that they moved in, they had Bill's son Lawrence with them, and Lawrence was just a typical kid. He was like 14, 15. They said he was very well behaved. They never had any issues with him until they moved in. Right after Liz had the baby, they were sitting in the room and he gets up to go to the restroom, and then he hears somebody like stomping around. It sounded like heavy boots. He knew it couldn't have been Liz, so he was convinced that it was Lawrence. Goes to check on Lawrence. Lawrence is asleep. So then he goes to Liz and he's like, I thought that sound was Lawrence, but nobody was here. And Liz told him she had no idea what he was talking about. She didn't hear anything at all. So he thinks, well, maybe I'm just going crazy. The next morning they talked to Lawrence. Lawrence hadn't heard anything either, so thought maybe he just imagined it. So then Liz takes the baby upstairs, and when she's upstairs, she hears the door slam. They hear the door slam downstairs. It's the room that she's in is the door that slammed, but the door was already shut. She's confused, he's confused, they're all confused. Then Lawrence starts acting odd, and more odd than like a typical teenager. He really starts acting out. He's cussing them. He's talking in like a different voice, a different accent. He thought Lawrence must be possessed. She thought he was overreacting a little bit. She was like, let's not jump to conclusions. Like, he's got to be just like going through it, right? I couldn't find a picture of Lawrence, but what happened next, I would have lost it if I was either one of them. So Grandma comes to visit his mother, and Lawrence comes out the front door. She's like, oh, Lawrence, I've missed you. How are you? And then that fool spat in her face. He just like hauled off and spit right in Grandma's face. Then goes back in the house like what the hell? Like, what did Grandma do? He's convinced something like major's going on, right? He calls a psychic to come over, and the psychic comes, and I'm telling you, you guys are going to think I'm making this name up, but the guy's name was Larry Harry. I personally would like to go on record by saying that I think Larry Harry was full of shit, and let me tell you why. Make your own decisions, but I think you might agree with me. He shows up, he's got his team with him, and he's like, oh yeah, I also brought these two. And they're just like two Dutch mediums that come in. They're looking around the house. They're like, like I'm sensing like an old person and maybe like two boys, and then like, something dark. There's definitely something dark here. Let me add that when they got there, as they're walking in, Lawrence rushes by them, kind of like kiss my ass as he runs out the door, right? Like, oh, you have like a lovely son. What's going on with him? Oh, well, he's been acting weird. He's like, oh, yes, I get what you're saying. I can hear it, like he's acting out. Then he says, okay, I've talked to my colleagues and Lawrence is the problem. Bill's like, really? Liz is like, okay, let's just like calm it down for a minute. Like, let's calm down. I don't know that it's Lawrence that's the problem. Ma'am, respectfully, I am the psychic here, and your teenage son has got to get the hell out of here. Like, you got to get rid of him. Get rid of him now. What? Bill's like, okay, like, say less. I'll get rid of him. Like, that's fine. If that's going to make all this stop, then we'll get rid of him. Immediately, Liz is like, no. He was Bill's son, not hers, so she couldn't really stop it. So they send him off to a boarding school. Just like, that's not the end of it, okay? The main reason that they were like, yeah, it's Lawrence, let's get rid of him, because Lawrence was out looking around in the woods and he found this house. They thought that Lawrence brought whatever from that house in the woods back, but let me tell you about the house in the woods. He's out looking around the house in the woods. He goes and gets his dad. His dad's looking at the house in the woods. They get the neighbor. The neighbor shows up and he's like, oh, yeah. These are headstones. There were headstones just laid up against the side of the house. They were all broken, misused, and everything. And they said, well, way back a long time ago, there used to be like a cemetery here. And then they moved the cemetery. Well, they moved the headstones. And then when they built your house, they just used part of the headstones. So this is headstones. Now, I'm no expert or anything, but I don't think that's Lawrence's fault. Lawrence is like, what the hell, Dad? Don't send me off. And he's like, sorry, this is what's best for the family. You too. Like, instead of just moving, they send Lawrence away. That's why the stuff keeps going, okay? So the stuff keeps happening. The psychics come back. It was like 6 months or a year or something later. And they're like, so how's Lawrence? And they're like, oh, he's doing great. He's staying with the family. He's like off at boarding school. And we go and visit him. And they're like, oh, so our bad. It's not really Lawrence, it's you. So, see, I told you. Lawrence wasn't the problem, so you sent him off for nothing. Now we know that Bill's the problem, and wait until you hear that story. Like, share, follow, comment for more. More to come about this house because yikes.